Oh, it's time to argue again, and I am bringing in one of the best debaters, one of the best arguers in the fantasy landscape. Alex Rikleen is going to be in here, but before he graces us with his angry presence, Michael Bolton's just going to calm things down.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and you're all winners. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. Here to argue. I think this might be the last one of my argument shows where people come on and want to pick fights and then lose, and that's fine. They can do that. You know, people enjoy pain. It's a humiliation fetish, I guess, and this man knows a lot about fetishes. He's just gotten out of a situation where he was able to get himself off by yelling at an old lady. It is Alex Rikleen. Alex, welcome back to the show.
That is a closer to accurate introduction than many of your listeners will believe.
And you know what? They don't have to know which part is accurate. That is the beauty of that introduction, is that some of that is actually 100% true, and you got to figure out which part it is. Alex, we are here to discuss the hottest topics in fantasy basketball, but also some that might not be hot, but we want to talk about them anyway. And you devour, you consume, you are a professor of fantasy basketball. You go through and look at all this stuff, and you wanted to hit me with something, because me and Dan Besbris the other day, we talked about the folly, or I talked about the folly of 9-cat rankings, the straight 9-cat rankings that would suggest to you and suggest to me that Grayson Allen was 100 spots better of a player than Paolo Banchero, which of course is dumb, but that's how those rankings project out. And you said, okay, we've got that part of it, but I've got something else. So what do you got? We're talking about projections, you're talking about rankings. Tell me, what's your problem?
So I
don't treat me like I'm an old lady though. First,
I liked your conversation with Dan. I thought you guys were kind of like hitting a lot of good points, but I feel as though you guys kind of and you like came right up to it. One of you even like said the line, and I was like, yeah, keep going with that, and you kind of stopped and then like diverted. You guys correctly described the potential problems with ranking systems, but you, correct me if I'm wrong, don't put out a draft day ranks. You put out projections that, Basketball Monster can, amalgam into an ordered rank.
Yep.
But what is your solution for someone? What is someone who needs a quick, short answer to how do you rank order players for draft day? What is taking your conversation with Dan, what is your prescription? How do you move forward from that conversation and say, here's how you use that, here's what you do on draft day? And I felt like that was the next step from your conversation with Dan, and I wanted to have that part of the conversation because I feel like it's the next and important step. Yes, rankings, they serve a purpose. They have they do some good things for the industry. They also cause a lot of problems. But okay, we still need something to help us on draft day, especially those of us who, have jobs that isn't in this industry.
You are correct, right? So that is true. And deliberately, I do not put out a list of rankings and say these are my top whatever. I don't do that for very specific reasons. You mentioned it, and like talk about edging up to it. You got there and you said it creates problems as well, because it does. It does create a problem, because if you create a shortcut of a list for somebody and then they rely upon that as their draft to just go down it, you will invariably fail. The problem with this situation with category leagues and projections is there is no actual solution that provides that easy list that actually gives you the things, the nature of the game, the structure of the game, the 9-sided elements of the game don't allow that to be. I've worked on this for years, right? I've come to this scenario where I can put out a change in ranking formula, a change to the non-normal distributions and the weighting based on variability, scarcity, prioritization in rounds, and all that sort of stuff. And I can do that to give you better ideas. But it would never just give you a list where you take this guy, because every decision that you make, and it's part of the complexity and part of the enjoyment I think we get with this, Alex, is
it's why fantasy basketball is a better game than fantasy football.
Agree.
But it's also a cop-out.
No, but you can't do it, because every pick that you make, Alex, every pick that you make is influenced by what you did before. And you cannot create anything static that accounts for that. You can't do that, because I can say that, all right, well, I could create a static list and it would say I would pick this guy here, but then I don't know what, like, if I'm picking it like 1 and there's 23 picks before I get back to my next one, how do I know what has happened in any of those ones? So then you get down to it and you go, well, I'm sitting here, but this guy actually still remains as the top player, but given who else is now left after it or who has gone, like, everything changes dynamically. And that's what our draft tracker tries to do, is it adjusts dynamic value of players. It shows you what is gone and what is available in terms of stats. And I like to, again, it's a teaching thing here for me as well, is, providing that ranking tweak to show like a number, because we all love a number, we love a list, right? But also when I'm drafting, if I see the top of my board there and I see that guy, I don't take that guy. I go, well, I've got, what's in the next 15? What am I looking at here? What do I need? Geez, I'm a little light on blocks. Who in this next group of 15 players can actually help me in field goals and blocks? And I'll take him. And I don't need to go to the top of that list. But that sort of thing, I don't think could be replicated in an easy paint by numbers sort of a list. And that's where I try and educate this idea of, don't look at the top. Look at what you need and what you might get later and what has come. And like, did 6 centers just go and you got 1 center left and you need rebounds? Well, do it. Like, who cares if that guy is maybe 10 spots lower? And that's why you see like a Zubats or a Hartenstein push up earlier in a lot of drafts that I do, because I need this now. It's disappearing and my team is light on here, and making that decision is the enjoyment of it. But unless I've tried to figure out a way to be able to make this an easy list of this dynamic stuff, but it just, there's too many variables.
So, I mean, you're simultaneously right, but also there's something that I feel like the listener needs, which is, when is you have an idea in your head of when is the correct time to start considering Giannis. The projections, the ranks, those are way off. We all agree. But
well, they're not if you use my rankings. They're not. If you use my formula, they're not. That's what I've tried to do, is make them realistic, so that Giannis doesn't sit at 45 and Trey doesn't sit at 30, and that Paolo doesn't sit at 80. That's what I tried to do with changing the way that formula is presented, to give at least like an idea of, he should be in the top 6 here, whether it's 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. That doesn't actually matter that much, but that's what those tweaks are for.
So, but how do you come to these conclusions of like where you are going to consider these players, especially the players who are farthest off? I agree completely with the idea that the answer is going to change for every draft.
Yeah.
But I also think that listeners need us to say, yes, the answer is going to change for every draft, but to use an example I've been talking about a lot, I think that Hartenstein, if you're in a situation where you're punting points somewhere around the 60s, I'm starting to be okay with it. And if you're not, I think that you need to be waiting longer than that, and that might mean you miss him. Or or Suggs. I think if you really need steals, then if you need assists and steals, you can be looking at him in the 80s, versus if you aren't, you should be waiting longer. But like, we're coming up with these numbers, and how are we coming up with, for me, 60 for Hartenstein and for me, 80 for Suggs? where are you coming up with those rough starting points? I feel like that is something that, even though it is variable per draft, and it is really important to teach to say that over and over and over again, I think that people also do want us to give some specific guidance. And how are you coming up with that, especially for these players where what the projection ranks say we know is off from their value, like the high steals guy?
Yeah, that's interesting, because like you say that, and how do you come up with the numbers? This is what I've worked on really hard for the last 3 years, is to try and do that. So when I go in and look at these numbers and the way that I weight these categories and change some of the ideas behind these positioning of guys, is that like you see Suggs appear at 90 or whatever, which I find is that range of like your 10 spots one side, 10 spots the other side, and you're okay taking him in that area. And also I am at pains always, I think, when I'm producing stuff and talking about stuff, to say that each time that we get further into a draft, the difference between players is smaller. So a 40th guy and the 70th guy, like, we need to stop feeling as though these are just very clear-cut one after the other. And you can have a certain order in round one, and that is okay. Then after that, everything spreads and everything blooms, and the ideas of all this stuff changes as we move forward on a lot of these different ideas with that. So like, I think that sort of thing, and I think making that rankings formula change, which I've done over the last few years, and every year I've done it, the result always seems to work better than the idea of Giannis being 50th. Or whichever player it is, or DeLon Wright being 40th, or whatever stupidity has come out. Every one of them, no matter what the year, it's not like I'm trying to retrofit a formula onto what the numbers are to make them look how I are. Because if I do the same thing each year, it does give the same results, which I think is, again, not a proof necessarily, but an indication that is putting that on the right track, is getting those guys in the spots that make sense. You're never going to be able to get it always locked in completely there. There's going to be differences between how you want to approach things. But I do think that the way that I've approached that and talking through it, I think gives people, it can be hard because it gives people an idea, but also like it might look completely different to what a traditional rank looks like or a traditional ADP looks like. And they think, I just made a gigantic mistake. And that's where I think that idea of something that has been put out for so long causes those problems, because then it can screw with your head thinking, I'm going to take this guy. Where if you just end up taking those guys who push up that, I did an experiment like this on Basketball Monster yesterday with it and wrote an article about it, and the teams that just drafted at the top from 9 cat rankings, both of them had like horrendously low points and assists, really low turnovers, and they were solid in their percentages, but they had such low volume that they were subject to one free throw difference over a week. Their team loses 2 free throws or makes 2 free throws, and their free throw percentage changes by 3% over the course of an entire week. Like, where you go, look at me, look how good I am in my free throws, but like it takes one missed shot and you're bad again. So like that's so that, and I showed that and proved all that sort of stuff over there. So I think that I'm very confident that I'm on the right track with it, but it doesn't play out to everybody. No, people will often say, well, that doesn't make sense because this guy was actually ranked here. And I go, yeah, that's if you believe how those rankings show up, and I don't.
Right. And to be clear and try to be helping the listeners here, the formula you were just talking about, where do people find it?
It's at Basketball Monster, but I've spoken a lot about it on here, about just adjusting the way that we approach a head-to-head league. Again, like Giannis is always the good example. It used to be Drummond in the past, or Shaq if you want to go further, where they'd be ranked 150th, but they go in the top 20. Well, something's not adding up. It's like, so you just like removing a player's worst category. We understand that head-to-head's a weekly game with a lot of streaming, so the negative stats like turnovers, I'm not bothering with that. And then those variable stats, the high variance stats that are low volume, they're just not as important, because if you want to rely upon those as the basis of your team, you are going to be subjecting yourself to such a large amount of variance that you'll think you're good. You'll look at your weekly matchup and go, I'm beating him. Like steals, blocks, field goals, free throws, I'm done. Like easy. Just give me some threes and I'm good. And then one guy on the other team gets 5 steals instead of 2 and you've lost. And you go, well, what happened? I thought it was good. So reducing the way that those things push somebody up high in the rankings, and every year the same thing. I think came on this show Like last year, I can't remember if it was Kessler or Jaren Jackson. I said, do not take them at that spot because those blocks, if they lose half a block, then they drop 40 spots.
Yeah.
And Jaren, and yep, look, and I've had it with Jaren. I've had it with Miles Turner in the past, and I've had it with steals guys like DeJounte Murray when he was first traded to Atlanta and he averaged 2 steals in San Antonio. I go, yeah, but if he doesn't get 2 steals, he's the 40th best player. And he didn't, and he dropped down. And that is what I've been trying to always figure, because you're right. We'll get off this topic in a second, but originally that idea was we could see these rankings, we'd all see them and go, Giannis was 40th, but of course he's a first-round guy if you do this. And this guy's, yeah, but he's do this and you punt this and he's there for that. And we'd always have to just make that calculation ahead. I go, screw this shit. Like, why are we making people look at a list that clearly doesn't reflect A, the reality, or B, how those guys are actually valued? And then we have to make that initial calculation in our head. So let's make it better. And that's what I did. And it is at Basketball Monster, but I've talked about the process behind what I do on this show about the weightings of these things too.
Let's pause. We're talking about it. We're drilling down. People are 20 minutes into this. Basketball Monster has a lot of great tools, but also not always the easiest website to maneuver. Be specific. Where do we find this on Basketball Monster?
Feels like you're doing one of those like ads. You're gonna sell a vacuum cleaner or something. I did never promote like
sell those vacuum cleaners.
I don't really ever promote like the stuff on Basketball Monster like that. I honestly just never do. But it's on the projections page. So on the projections page, you can go on and there's in the display columns. It's called Durant for Roto Leagues or Durant head to head, which shows the change in weightings and a focus on a head to head sort of format, or you can just go into your league settings there and you can manually punt things or turn on different weights. And the weights that I use, there's articles over there where I've written all that up to explain how I use it. And I will do a show on it here, but I'm giving the members that slight advantage of just knowing exactly what I put into those weights. And I will do it on here eventually, but it's really simple that I'm just down weighting the high variance, low volumes. I am factoring in that we're talking 3-game samples for players in a weekly matchup. And I am focusing on the idea that volume in the majority of head-to-head leagues is what wins. Well, not what wins, but it's what you strive for.
Right. Totally. Yeah. I mean, we agree. I'm just trying to sort of
that's the point of it, because people can argue it easy.
Helpful to
what
I always struggle with. We agree. I'm just trying. I struggle with how to be as helpful to people as possible within where we broadly agree.
Yeah, so like we'll get off this topic in a second, and maybe we've got another couple we'll do, but I think we might just cut it down to the 2 because this is really interesting, right? Is that you talk about? I think it was a few years ago we had a discussion on this show in this similar thing, and we're talking about Al Horford, right, and his relative value, and we're talking about the
also known as the GOAT. Right?
Yeah,
the greatest.
Yep.
Al Horford, the greatest player of all time.
Love Al Horford. Horford's a great option, but like this idea that like he'll come out and he'll be like he's played 28 minutes and he's the 40th ranked player, and you go, why is that? Well, it's because he had 0.4 turnovers and he averaged 8 points and all that sort of stuff. Like, yeah, okay, but if you're picking him around that area, then you've given away a category, and there's certain things that just and the idea, well, you don't pick him there, you just get him later on. I go, that's great, but then that reality of what that number isn't true. It's not what the actual valuation of a player is. And there's something else, and I haven't gotten to it yet, but I've done a little bit of it. Of like, is there a way that we look at it? And this is again complex. We're talking hundreds of players, 500 players in the NBA at a time. But like, if we just put one player against the other and say, how many categories are you better than the other guy in, or how many categories are you better than the other guy in by a certain amount, therefore influencing a team? Like, is that more important? If you beat a guy in one category by a million miles, but lose the other 8, which one's better? Like, yeah, that's the Jokic Wembanyama discussion, isn't it? At the top of the draft, is that you have Wemby having a million blocks and he's still good in everything else, but if Jokic pips him in every other category, he's having a gigantic lead in one category, the win, or is it being able to be better in the other 7 or 8? Is that better? I actually don't know the answer to that, but I think that's another part of that. Whereas, if we just put these guys together and Paolo is so bad at field goals and free throws and steals and blocks, but what if he just cooks you in the other categories against that guy, or the other person gets 4 field goal attempts and 1 free throw? I go, okay, he beat me, but who cares?
I think the answer changes through the draft too.
Exactly.
I think later in drafts, that kind of high specialist is more valuable. You know, a player that you and I talked about when we were on Noah's pod together,
Oh, yeah.
Peyton Watson, you know, I just drafted him, I think a little earlier than other people would have considered drafting him in a medium deep league. And because I think that block from a guard per game, especially from, you know, off of my bench, even if he kind of stinks everywhere else, I think that is more valuable than a lot of the other stuff that I'm going to get around there from people who might outproduce Peyton Watson in most other categories, you know, late in the week. If I am close in blocks, I know who I'm subbing in.
It's an interesting one. I need to go on because I actually need to tell you about game time, which we'll get to in a second. Is that like number one, that's a folly of the sides because Peyton Watson's played 0 minutes at guard across his NBA career, and he will play 0 minutes at guard again this season. He just will not do that. But you're right. If that's
correct,
you can exploit that sort of thing. But then you get into opportunity cost. And you go, who else is giving me a block? And you go, okay, but who else? Like the other guy might give you 12 points and 2 threes, and Watson might get you 6.5 with 3 rebounds. It's like that block is good, but then you lose the opportunity in other areas, and that becomes a balancing act. And oh my God, that's why this game is so fun.
It depends on your league. You know, in a games max league where I'm subbing in, which is overwhelmingly what I prefer to play in a games max league. You know, if I'm playing Peyton Watson in one of those starts, it's because I either feel pretty good about my points, etc., or because I feel pretty good about losing points, etc., and I am competing in blocks. You know, to the point we were saying earlier, these players' value does change, but it does change where you go. However, you know, I was looking at pick 140 or something. I'm not, as much as I like Peyton Watson as that for that role, I often think there are better options available in the 110s and 120s.
We're going to come back and talk about players who might be traded and how we approach that. But first of all, today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. When you are looking for tickets to live events, maybe it is a private Peyton Watson showcase. I don't know. It might be a comedy event. It might be Alex yells at old woman on stage. I'm not sure what events are happening up in Boston. It's a weird place, but whatever it is, Game Time is going to be able to cover you off. Game Time has the new feature, Game Time Picks, where they find all of the different tickets for the event that you're looking for, and they say, don't worry about the bad ones. We are punting them out, and we are showing you the good ones. So that just saves you time. It saves you money as well, much like all their other things. We've got the zone deals, the flash deals, the lowest price guarantee. Game Time has your pocket absolutely in mind when they are doing all this stuff. So take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets, event tickets, sports tickets. Go and download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. We have got another segment we've got to talk about here, Alex, because, well, trades. And you brought this up, and it is an interesting one. I think maybe this is one of those ones where I don't like to get heavily into it because trades are weird, right? There's most of the time we hear a rumor of a trade. Shout out to John Collins and Miles Turner, and it doesn't happen, right? It just there's so much that it impacts it. And my general rule on this is usually I just don't care. Right? I just usually don't worry too much about it because most of the trades that you hear, unless they are coming from RIP Woj or Shams, it's just nothing. It's bullshit. It's not a real thing. It's someone talked about it, and that's it. It's if you hear like, hey, this is happening, this is gaining steam, and you go, all right, let's go. I need to get out of the bathroom and run to the computer or do something because something's going down. These other rumors, like the LaVine stuff, I don't know how much we heard of that from Woj or Shams last season. I'm not sure we've heard anything. It didn't happen, clearly. So how do you approach it with these guys? So let's list a bunch of names who we think are candidates. Like LaVine, Vooch is a pretty big opportunity there. Brandon Ingram feels like he has to go at some point. Jarrett Allen at some point in Cleveland. I don't know, like Jeremy Grant, another one. Who else
Yep.
is in that mix? Do you say?
So I think that the four main teams that are like that jump to mind for this year are the Blazers, the Bulls, the Jazz, and
Yep.
the Pelicans.
Yep.
For the Blazers, it's their front court where they have, three centers, and presumably Donovan Clingan is the only one they're committed to in the long term. I don't know if Robert Williams can ever be healthy again, but he was really good when he was healthy.
He was.
And, I don't know if DeAndre Ayton can care, but he was really good when he could care. And so, but you can't play all three of them enough minutes to get value out of it. So presumably to back, I'm getting myself jumbled. So you got the Blazers with their front court and Jeremy Grant. You've got the Bulls with Vucevic and Zach LaVine, and maybe their guard situation. They actually
it's weird.
now have a lot of guards. I kind of think of Zach LaVine as like a wing. I don't know if maybe I should think of him more as a guard.
I guess
than
it depends on the team. He's going to play like the three for the Bulls, but I think on most teams he'd almost.
Yeah.
You don't want him guarding the three, but he's going to have to because they've got too many guards. You're right. So I think most teams he's a two.
Yeah. But separate from Zach LaVine, the rest of the guards, I view anyone other than Giddey as potentially tradable because, especially if Lonzo Ball can actually play, they've actually got.
I think Lonzo's a risk to be traded. To be honest.
Well, if he can play, he's a risk to be traded. Or he makes the rest of them a little bit more tradable. So you got the Bulls. You've got the Pelicans, who, their six best players all play either power forward or point guard on offense. And on defense, most of them don't. And two of them, except for Herb Jones and Trey Murphy. So, the Pelicans are in a very weird spot.
Yeah, they need to do something. You're right.
They need a center. Their roster doesn't. They've got a ton of talent, but their roster doesn't make sense as it is. And the Jazz, who they've got a lot of assets, and
Collins, Clarkson, Sexton. What are these? Are these guys playing on this team? I don't know.
Yeah,
don't think so. I just don't know that.
The only one who I feel really confident is staying is Markkanen, and that's because the CBA forbids them from trading him this year.
Yeah, otherwise he was out of there. Otherwise,
yeah. So those are the four teams that.
Oh, what are the Wizards?
Come most
Wizards:
to mind.
Brogdon, Kuzma, Valanciunas.
Yep. They would probably be the fifth team I named.
The Hawks. The Hawks. Capella. DeAndre Hunter. There's
DeAndre Hunter is a big one.
But the thing is, Alex, is two of these guys will get traded probably.
4.
Okay, so
we named 20 names.
Here is something that I'll throw at you like an old lady. I will tell you that you would often come on this show or other shows and you will say we are terrible at evaluating rookies for fantasy basketball. That is the crux. Yes, and you say there is going to be a good rookie, but we do not know who it'll be. Obviously, Wemby and Chet last season, pretty obvious. We actually got them we were actually a bit under on how good they were, but we knew that they were going to be good and they needed to be taken in the top 50, top 40.
And
that was
Wemby meets my exception. Chet doesn't, but Wemby meets my exception for Wemby was a predictably very good rookie.
Yes, that was.
I have one exception.
That was easy.
I have one exception. It is a wire-to-wire, obvious number one pick. Wemby met it, and he was good.
Let's see if Cooper Flag meets it next year. I reckon he might, but we'll see. But yeah, so that's one of your things. So there'll be a rookie that pops off, but we don't know who it's going to be. So that is one of the things that you throw out there. And I will say the same thing here. There is 60 rookies that enter the NBA. Probably more with two ways and all that sort of stuff. And we don't know who it's going to be. Guys are going to get traded. There's going to be 12 trades, 14 trades, 30 players moved. We don't know who. We might get 3 of them right. I will do a show every year, likely player to get moved and I do it mainly because people just want it. But I'll always say, I don't know, man. Like I am telling you,
I imagine the views are probably pretty high on that.
Yeah,
actually.
People love it, and it's like, but I'm telling you, I don't know. Do not make moves around this stuff. Just be aware, and like I'll get 2 or 3 of them. Right, there was some like the most obvious one of all time was Kyrie Lewis last season because the Pelicans needed to get under the luxury tax, and he was the one who made sense, right? But we're going to get him wrong. So to
rewind a second to a question you asked a minute ago, I don't think a good way for evaluating this is listening to rumors because, as you said, unless Shams or Woj, Woj is gone. So I guess unless Shams or Mark Stein are telling us that this is happening, maybe Chris Haynes, unless one of the major guys are telling us that this is happening, and they're being pretty crystal clear about it, then we should not assume that it's going to happen. Number one, but we can use logic and look at a team and say they gotta do something.
But
and I do feel like,
how many times have we said that? Right?
I feel like they're,
and it just doesn't happen. We've said it. Look, teams have the bias that we have in fantasy, and they go like Masai Ujiri came out and said it last year. He said, "Yeah, look, I should have moved off, but like I like my guys." Like I like them. Like I like them here. Like I didn't want to do it. Like I know I should have, and I waited too long. But like I wanted him here.
So that's the correct counterpoint here.
Yeah.
So first of all, I think that looking and using logic is a better system than the rumor mill.
Yep.
But a good counter to making any decisions off this is what you're saying right now, which is fair. But this is why I wanted to talk to you about this, because I do find myself avoiding Brandon Ingram because I just like I do feel like Brandon Ingram, just like in my bones, I feel like Brandon Ingram is going to get moved, and I don't know if he's going to end up moved to a place where it's worse. And I know that that's, I'm engaging in a logical fallacy here. And I try to limit the number of players I let myself fall into that trap on. But I wanted to have this conversation because I know I do it sometimes. I probably do it more than I should. Do you ever do it? How often? How much do you let this affect you? Do you ever let it affect you? Are you more disciplined than I am on this? Like, where do you fall on this?
I'm going to leave you hanging on that answer. So just we'll get back to it. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You open the app. Unlike what I just did to Alex, I'm not going to bring you to the precipice and then not let it finish off. It is right there. You can just get straight in on FanDuel and take a look at all of the odds in-game. You're watching it. It's there. Bang. Odds there. Bang. Stats. Done. Play-by-play, it's all there, the same spot. You don't need to go anywhere else. You don't need to open up any other tabs. You don't need to chuck it into incognito mode. It is all there on that one screen. So place your bets, watch the action, see what's going down, and do it right now. And as a new customer, you go in there, you chuck a $5 bet on, and you get $200 in bonus bets. It's guaranteed. You don't have to win. You don't lose, whatever. You just place the bet, and you get the $200 in bonus bets. So head across to FanDuel, sign up, check it out, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. So, Alex, the answer is yes, but no also. And this is what I mean by that, is that nearly all of these names that we've mentioned, right? If the only thing about it is, like say, for example, I have heard, and people have asked me this question, man, have you heard these rumors of Jimmy Butler going to Golden State? And I go, I don't care. Like, have I heard them?
No,
whatever. I would make no draft decision based on that at all. I don't care. But with Brandon Ingram, right, I look at that and go, I'm a little bit down on Ingram. He was terrible in the playoffs. When he doesn't have the ball in his hands, struggles. He doesn't take enough threes, and now DeJounte Murray is there. So I'm already downgrading Brandon Ingram because of situation. Is Trey Murphy a better fit with the starters? Maybe. And all those elements are risk there. And the fact that I've downgraded him so much in that spot means a trade might actually make him better. So I'm actually not, I've got these other reasons. Zach LaVine, is he going to get traded? I don't know. Does he pull a situation where the surgery could wait till the end of the season, but he decides to get it done in the mid-season like last year? Or does he get squeezed because they want to prioritize other rookies? That's another problem. Same with Vooch. Is Vooch going to get traded? Who wants that contract? Nobody. What if they just say, man, actually our eyes now work. You are terrible. And we'll get Jalen Smith out there. And that I will downgrade Vooch because he was bad last year again. So, yeah, do they just try something different? So look, those ones, then the other ones, the Jazz.
Getting rid of Vooch and putting in Jalen Smith doesn't help with the terrible problem.
I tell you what it helps with, though. It helps with somebody who can put their arm up and protect the rim. That's what it helps with. Don't hold the ball and ISO, jab step, mid-range nonsense and like pretend to put your arms out.
I'm just making a Jalen Smith is terrible joke.
I know. and that's the state of where Vooch is at, right? But like Colin Sexton, Jeremy Grant, John Collins, Jordan Clarkson, whatever, right? Like I can say, they might be traded, but also look at them and go, are these guys playing in March at all? That's my risk. Like I feel good about what Sexton's doing. If I didn't have this risk of the Jazz doing what they've done for the last 2 years, I'd be very interested in drafting him. But I've got that risk, and then you can also add on, there's a trade. Okay. So I guess if it's the singular thing of a trade, right, I won't care about it. Like I think even in our chat before this, you said, I think you had D'Angelo Russell on that list, and maybe he's traded, but I do not care. Like that one, I have absolutely no care whatsoever about a trade. Even like probably the Kuzma one, I don't actually care. Valanciunas, don't really care. Maybe they're traded or not, but like whatever. That's one of those ones. The percentage chance leads to, it's so small that I'm not worried about. But when I can chuck another reason on top of it, that's when I start to get into that. Like, now you've just built it a little bit too much up.
I think that makes sense. I think for me, it also a little bit depends on how much I need the player.
That's
so true. For Brendan Ingram, he's an earlier pick, so presumably I would need him. Or for Walker Kessler, you're looking at him a little bit later, but also a lot of the time you're looking at him because you kind of need blocks probably. Mm-hmm. And the downside of something happening that hurts him could be high. Although actually I think Walker Kessler is someone who a trade would help. And I think the risk is more of a not trade and them deprioritizing him. But that's a separate thing. But how much do I need him? Which, relates to an early draft pick, but it can mean someone later in the draft who is filling a glaring need. Is this sort of a luxury pick, in a draft where this isn't someone who I really think is going to get traded, but like in a draft where I already had Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, and I was like looking at Kelly Oubre. If I was afraid of Kelly Oubre getting traded, which I'm not, but that's like a luxury pick where it's just like, oh, it would be fun, and what a nice, like, someone who'll benefit if either of those guys gets hurt. Whereas, someone who's like filling a need, I need more. I'm repeating myself.
Yeah, it's if you go circle all the way back to 3 weeks ago when we started this conversation about the idea of the simplifying and what's a definite answer, my answer is I don't care. Like, as a general rule, if you're going to tell me, will you pick this guy because of a trade or not pick this guy because of a trade, then I just said I don't care. If you ignore it, if you want to play balance, you might get dicked over on one of them, but the balance of probabilities is that you'll be fine, because I would say it's definitely running at under 20% of those highly mentioned names in trades that get traded. It just doesn't happen. Like, we run at such a high level of that not happening that you're good. You're always going to cop one of them, right? You will always cop one of them. But there's a general rule played out over time, picking these. That is the correct way to go. And there's always going to be individual nuance, but some people don't care for that. They don't want that. They don't have time for that. So what's my general rule? Don't worry about it. I think that is the easiest way to approach that. Do not worry about a trade rumor. Even if you think yourself, and we can use logic, this would make sense in the trade. Look, we all sat there and go, man, Cavs need a wing, the Pelicans need a center. Man, what if they trade Brandon Ingram for Jared Allen? It matches up, it all makes sense. And they went, nah, we're good. No, not happening. I mean,
or just use it as a tiebreaker. Like, just use it as a tiebreaker. You're in a super deep league and you're, looking at like Daniel Tice or I don't know who else goes around whenever Daniel Tice goes?
About 4 million. About pick 4 million, I think you're right.
You're in like a super deep league and you're looking at that, then you can say, all right, as a tiebreaker, I'll avoid Tice because maybe the Pelicans will acquire an actual center. But you're probably right. It probably should be a tiebreaker or something you ignore, because the ones that we pay the most attention to are Miles Turner, and it didn't happen, or John Collins, and it didn't happen, or Clint Capella last year, and it didn't happen, or Clint Capella the year before,
I was told,
or Clint Capella the year before, and it didn't happen.
I was told last year in the middle of the season, DeJounte Murray is causing so much mess in this locker room. It is disgusting in here. There's no way he can stay. Here he was. And of course, he got traded in the offseason because it is 100 times easier to do trades in the offseason as well. Yeah. And they just said, well, I guess we'll just eat the last 2 months of this season. And they clearly didn't care because their second best player at the time of the end of the season was Vic Krejci. And they said, we're not even going to bother converting you, my guy. Like, we're done with this year. Like, we actually do not care about this playing at all. And they just put the clubs in the bag and they went, we'll see you at the clubhouse and we'll come back next time, because they were done. And that's basically what happened. Yeah. So that's what I was told. Like, he is being one of the biggest dickholes you will ever see here around this area as a general term. And he can't last. It didn't last. We just have to wait until it actually became possible to do in the off-season. And Alex, what it's possible for me to do now is to say thanks, because that was a great chat. We went in depth in a lot of topics.
We didn't even get to talk about Chris Middleton. The people want to know about Chris Middleton. That is what their drafts are hinging on.
And on that note, tell people where they can find your Chris Middleton appreciation blog posts on your Tumblr.
Yeah,
Chris Middleton is my daddy.
I'm going to drop a 3,000 word Tumblr post on Chris Middleton tomorrow.
Can't wait to read your little sparkly emojis and pictures and songs, and it's going to be great.
At Rikleen on Twitter. I've been posting more on Blue Sky if anyone's over there, and RotoWire. That's where you find me during the season.
Oh yeah, that's what
weekly
you do.
Article, weekly waiver wire on CBS, and I got a couple preseason articles that are out on Yahoo right now. If you're looking for something that's already out,
go check him out. The Professor Alex Rikleen, all the stuff that he does. Thank you again, my friend, for coming on and chatting with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And that is the end of the show, and that is the end of the Arguing About Fantasy series. We've still got mock drafts to go, points leagues, category leagues, do not drafts, must drafts, the 240 game, plenty of other stuff as well. Guys, hit the subscribe, hit the thumbs up, check everything out that you need to. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.